Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I want to talk about something more of the extreme range in the lifestyle community and the BDSM community. It might even be something more we would consider on the outer fringes. And this is when we start discussing, I don't know if we want to really call them taboos, because a lot of things what we do within the community itself would be considered taboo in the realm of the human sexual experience. But when we get into some of these styles and types of play, some of them become a little bit more extreme than others. Maybe you're being suspended through hooks in your skin from the ceiling. I've had this discussion before. I've discussed some things about waterboarding and some other various aspects of play. But today, and I'm really not one for trigger warnings, but I know some of this content that I'm going to talk about today is going to be a little bit more extreme. So with that, if you have issues maybe with claustrophobia or thoughts of this, you just should be a little bit more forewarned. Because today I'm going to talk about a burial scene. I'm going to talk about its buildups, the work all the way through it, the amount of time and people that were involved in this scene, the culmination of, psychological consultations for the people involved, what the scene took to build, when the scene finally happened, and then the aftermath. And I kind of was, unsure wanting to discuss this, but I had a chat with a colleague and said, if we're really starting to explore some more of the depths of human sexuality and what we really want to kind of push ourselves into, this is something that should be discussed. It shouldn't be shied away from. And and the more I kind of thought about that, the more that made sense, because this is what this show is about. We're talking about things that push our limits in the forms of exploration and safety and desire, even in the forms of emotional release and catharsis that we go through in some of the forms of the lifestyle itself. With that being said, so I want to take you all back a few months ago. There is some people that I know that when they approached me, the thoughts were about, they're more on the heavy end of the sadist and masochistic side, pushing their elements of play. It is extreme for some, for others it's not. They have a very lengthy time within the lifestyle. They would be considered, they're a little bit more old school. So at the point of where they are at in their relationship, they're more of what's known as O and P. For those who are unaware, that stands for owner and property. They've kind of moved on from the master-slave dynamic. This couple has been together for, approaching about a decade, and have really an intimate and intricate knowledge of one another. They've done, demonstrations. They are in a little bit of a smaller community where they are surrounded themselves with a lot of like-minded people. That way, there's even still a lot of judgment nowadays in some of the things that the community does, because I tend to look at it as they're not as invested, or they don't have as much background knowledge within the lifestyle. So they're still kind of pushing this vanilla sense of their emotional self and projecting it upon others, saying, oh, well, you shouldn't do that because, well, I wouldn't, or the harm it could cause. Well, anything in life we do comes with a risk. Stepping outside of your home every day to go to work comes with a risk. Getting in your car comes with a risk. All of these things that we don't control, that are outside of our purview, come with a risk. When it comes to the realm of exploration within the lifestyle, everything we do here comes with a risk. If you rig somebody wrong, it comes with a risk. But I don't want to divert from that. I want to kind of really focus on this story because it's quite intricate. So a few months back, when this started to kind of became a talk in this circle, and I kind of was brought in on the consulting side as doing one of the assessments for somebody and their state and where they were. It was interesting to say none the least, because being a part of something like this, when there's so many people, you put a reputation on the line. Even me wanting to discuss this, it brings up concerns. I can't physically stop people from doing what they're going to do. I don't didn't necessarily know if I have the right to discern whether this is hurtful behavior, harmful behavior, or it's just sexual excitement. However, so a few months back, I was approached, and these people were talking about what they wanted to do. They wanted to go through an actual burial scene. Now, if you're kind of unfamiliar with what a burial scene kind of entails, this can range from anything where you're bury a part of somebody's body, bury someone up to their head. You can put them in a coffin. There are some similarities to mummification here, where someone's completely wrapped, they can't move. And, well, I'm going to focus more on the burial. So they wanted to be restrained, put into a coffin, put into the ground. Now, initially, that this begs a lot of questions here, even on the psychological side. We're talking about an exploration of fear and vulnerability. There's symbolism that's going on, potentialities of arousal and stimulation. That's just to name a few, and I'm going to get to all of that. So as this started to commence, the network of people grew immensely. I think ultimately in the end, there was well over 20 or 30 people involved, experts in different fields, engineers, people in the medical profession, the psychological profession. And why would somebody want to go through and build such a major scene might be the question, because for them, it was the buildup of the scene. They have asked me to keep their identities private, which I will respect, just because, they are on some social media, and it's not they're ashamed. They have no shame of what they do and their love for the lifestyle and their deep-rooted connection to each other. But because there is that fear and stigmatization within the social media sphere, instead of having a moment that was loving and transcending for these two people, they don't want that marred. So as it started out, they contacted a friend of theirs who had a very large piece of private land to do this, and they sat and had this discussion, said what they wanted to do, and that kind of became the first steps as they started talking to everybody inside of their social circle. From there, as this built forward, they were talking to give you a depth and understanding that they went through into their research. They talked to soil engineers, they talked to structural engineers to build things. So, worrying about collapse, tensile strength of boxes, weight measurements of soil density on top of something. And it was this very long, drawn out process where essentially he wanted to put his property into the ground while she was alive. And we are talking 6 feet down. There's no real other way to get around this, so just come out and say it. So to do this, you have to, there's got to be psychological states that are getting analyzed, medical conditions, and again, all of these other things I've already mentioned. So from there, this process started to build out that, they looked at a piece of land that was the best that they could do this on. And then the process begun. Slowly, first, the initials were contact with 3 different types of therapists to check the mental state and conduct assessments to, that this person is in their right mind. This person, again, being property or identifying in the property range. When that was cleared, then the procedures began. So they started looking at an area of land, and they did 5 test depths initially. First, what they did was they looked at the depth and how quickly could they get through in case of, anything. Was it the dirt too hard? So there was a process of even watering the land to kind of soften the dirt. Then towards the end, before the scene, which I will get to, then even covering it to protecting it from rain, because apparently, obviously you can't have it to the point it's mud because water adds weight. So from this process forward, began the first hole. So they dug a couple of feet down. The person got in. They initially were just kind of covered, and to kind of begin the sensations, to start the realizations of what was going on. So for this began this exploration of fear and vulnerability. And we have to understand that in our world, these activities that we are a part of, and especially in some of these taboo fetishes, they involve these elements of fear and vulnerability because some individuals are drawn to these experiences as a way to confront and explore their own fears in a controlled environment. This can, in some instances, lead to personal growth and a better understanding of our own emotional boundaries. Now, this type of styles and plays isn't for everyone. This is more on the extreme edge of what we do, right? And we need to be very well aware of this. I'm not telling people to run out and do these types of things. They do exist. There are forums that discuss this. There are dedicated websites that discuss these types of play. Tends to be people who have probably over, 8 years, I think, is on average people have been involved in the lifestyle, pushing further. Anyway, so after this, this person was brought out. They were discussed, they were checked, medically evaluated. How did it feel, to understand what it would be like. Now, they weren't going to be actually put into the ground and just covered in dirt. There would be no way to breathe. The weight tension, the weight release, or the weight ratio from the dirt would crush, more than likely crush their ribs, or at least restrict their airways. So they did agree to do this inside of a coffin. And we'll get to that. And then the next depth that they tried out at was 3 feet, and they worked themselves all the way down. Each week over time, whatever the ranges or issues that were going on at the time. After each setting, they, again, were evaluated, and next became the construction for the final area of the scene. So this involved going down, deep down. They used a backhoe to take out all the dirt. Dirt was placed off to the side, far enough away it wasn't going to add too much pressure for a cave-in. Then they had this engineer friend who's also part of the lifestyle come in. And this required, I want you to understand, this also required, not only did it require a lot of people who wanted to get involved, but it required financially quite a bit of money. Because you're not just doing this, digging a hole, throwing someone in a wooden, box and throwing them in the ground and covering them up. They're going extreme, but they're still doing risk evaluation and trying to mitigate as much of the risk as possible for doing something like this. So they ended up constructing kind of like a steel cage, which I know in some instances would defeat some of the purposes of doing this, but it was more done out of safety and restriction. And this was more to kind of, as the way I understand it, I'm not an engineer, but to support the wall structure around. So once the person was inside and then lowered down, that there wouldn't be a collapse, right? Because, and so they went in, they built this support structure, kind of like a retaining wall in an essence. And that was about the culmination of about 3 or 4 weeks in. So then from there, as the practices and the thought processes and the emotional check-ins came, they started talking about this connection of intimacy. In one of the interviews that I kind of conducted, it was this really fostered for them a really deeper sense of connection and intimacy between these two partners that they'd never felt before. that somehow this brought them closer together, that it allowed them to feel a higher level of trust had developed, and they started to experience this, which then required them to engage in an activity and create a bond that goes beyond the physical. We're starting to talk about the metaphysical range, the emotional ranges, let alone they had started also discussing their arousal and certain stimulation to the thoughts of this, because it is an extreme form of play. And through that, it can provide this really intense physical sensation and stimulation that people find sexually arousing. And this mix of pleasure and pain and this psychological intensity can create these heightened states of arousal that push us into these realms of doing things and push our boundaries. And even sometimes help us overcome some of the limits in our own mind that we've created that we're not necessarily ready to confront. And even through that, we get into they started discussing, and we got into the realm, and some of the other people involved discussed with them that there is the elements, of course, of escapism and control. And participating in these extreme forms can give us an escape from the stress and responsibilities of everyday life. And this intense focus required during this type of activity leads to this sense of mindfulness and temporary suspension of our external worries. And moreover, individuals who engage in these extreme activities really are not only just getting into the negotiation aspect, where we move well beyond that, we allow them a sense of control and agency within the context of play, because everything now is becoming more and more regulated. They're having a sense of what the style is going to be. This isn't just showing up at a scene where you and your dominant have discussed a couple of things you're going to do, and then, he may pick or she may pick what's going to happen. That dom's going to decide. So this goes beyond that. So moving forward in the context of it, they started adding new elements to it where they wanted to do a little bit, if you're not completely familiar even with like wrapping, so where someone kind of gets sealed down. So they had to figure out also inside of this box how they were going to kind of adhere the person down. So they're quite restricted. They were wearing a mask. So they had looked for different things because there was going to be some elements of breath play involved. So again, I want to stress how extreme this is, and this is not for everybody to rush out and do at all. Anyway, so it was the next part was they started on the construction and started looking at different types of materials for the box that this person would be in, the coffin, for lack of a better word. So they had settled on something more, metallic in strength, that had enough that they could understand that the density and the pressure of the weight of the dirt on top of them wasn't going to crush the box. It could handle X amount. So there, again, a lot went into this, to figuring this out. I mean, you would have thought that, somebody was planning a rocket launch for as many people that were involved. There were other dominants consulted for their expertise on wrapping. Some consulted on hoods, even the restraints that were going to be used. So then the test runs began with, now that this person was comfortable with going into the ground, and I'm going to get into what they described about that outside of the coffin next, but I want to talk about this. So when they started doing the wrappings in the coffin, what they started to experience was then the sensation of letting go. They had no control. There was no movement. They're completely wrapped down. They're wearing a hood or a mask, and more of their breathing is restricted. And it was more of this sense of, for them, as it was described, was a complete sense of freedom. So inside of the box, what they had done, they had constructed 4 additional emergency air supplies. So something went wrong. The person wasn't going to run out of air, which, I mean, again, there's never not enough risk. And then they went to the point that, took these things down through steel piping, which pretty much, if one failed, the likelihood of four failing was very low, but, you never know. There was an emergency button on the inside that if something was going wrong while it was happening or being covered, that the person could, be told to get them out quicker. And then finally was a tube coming straight out of the top of the box. It was secured, so breath play could be involved. So there was a lot of aspects that hit upon the extreme range of this style of play. So as we started talking next, and as I sat and other people I know that interviewed this person sat, we kind of got the same sense that this person had described being underground as they did the test runs at different depths of this extreme sense of calm, of this extreme release, feeling at one and in touch with not only themselves, but described it much like a sensory deprivation tank. And there are aspects of, if you're not familiar with those, a sensory deprivation tank, you float in a saline solution, a lid is closed over you, you don't hear anything, you don't see anything. You're really kind of limited so your mind starts creating a lot of these things. And from there, it was just this really sense of calm. The word calm kept coming up. This person showed no signs of, there was nothing for claustrophobia. There was no psychological concerns that were coming up. They, for all intents and purposes, were quite rational. It was just pushing a limit and a desire to do something so more taboo that we would consider. So next part became what would then be the final construction, the box, everything set out, the wiring run up one side, secured again. And day came, they were about a week out. And you could start to feel the tension was a little bit palpable. Things were starting to get more stressed. I think one person was the dominant in this situation, and the person in control was looking for, where a lot of sadists will tend to report we like to terrorize or beat or, extreme power exchange over another. There also then tends to become, when you've been with somebody long enough, it's also a responsibility to protect. And so the concern was brought up. The discussion was still had, do you want to go ahead? Do you not want to go ahead? What do you, and talking about these things becomes healthy, because this is how we explore our emotions and what we're feeling. And for somebody who's a sadist to start talking about, I have some concerns, is great, because then they can bring it up, they can stop the play and end it before it even began. They sat and they thought about it. They had more discussions. The one partner said, nope, I'd still like to go ahead with it. As long as you want to go ahead with it, I'm okay. Which gave that reassurance to their partner, the dominant in charge, to them really go ahead. One part that the dominant had expressed was, they were looking at, the fear factor of this all, and their property kind of coming back and saying to them, well, I'm not really scared. It's quite cathartic for me. There is this deeper connection, the symbolism for me that I'm experiencing through all of this. But undeterred, because it's still a major scene that these two people are building, all the people involved, they went again, everything was still a green light. It's kind of like talking about a spaceship launch, because you have so many people involved, because if anything can go wrong, you want everybody to be aware. And there was quite a few people there that watched this scene. So we're about 2 or 3 days out. Again, everybody's doing their final checks. At this point, everything that had been prepared for where the burial was going to take place had been covered, because there had been some concerns about weather. When that was checked by another professional, from there, everything was a go. The retaining wall was holding. There was no pressure. Nothing seemed to be problematic there. Strength of the box could hold, I think, twice the weight that was going in or was going to be placed on top. So that was okay. Everything was green light across the board. From there, at this point, was the final evaluations. Kind of everybody got a mental or a physical and a mental last check. Everything was good to go. So now we're at day of. There's quite a calm sense of the day. People started gathering, as I understand it, quite early in the day, mid-afternoon, 3 o'clock, and the scene was starting to be set. So everything's being checked at this point. Apparatuses, breathing, tubes, everything that's going to be connected to the, in case the emergency air, everything's working. So alleviating a lot of concerns. Checklists are going down. Everything is okay. And then the person got in. So they laid down. They were restricted. They were finally covered and sealed. They masked. The hood was put on. Their finger was placed over the emergency button in case anything was going to be needed, like, something was wrong. Lid was put on top of the box. And I'm kind of jumping a little bit here. So this was all about 3 o'clock, everybody's getting ready. So the scene starts commencing a few hours later. So the preparatory to this stuff took place about 20 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes before the scene commenced. I think it was a bigger build-up to the scene itself than it was actually putting them down in the hole, covering them, and then taking them out. So about 20 minutes out, again, I'll kind of run through this real quick. They, in the box, sealed, mask on, cover for the coffin goes on. They attached the main breathing through there, which then eventually, I think about a foot out of the ground, was then converted into plastic for breathing, or maybe it was 6 inches. I can't really recall. I'm not really sure on the depth, because they didn't want any pressure on the hose to cut off the air, because everything else was steel, and they didn't want, if something happened with the plastic piping, they didn't want it to be, too far down. Anyway, so they brought the 4 people carried out the coffin with the person inside and took them over to the hoist, and pretty much everybody kind of went quiet as the scene began, and watching, and the air was quiet. You could hear the footsteps. You could, see everybody doing anything. I mean, if somebody took a drink of water, it was that quiet. You could hear it, and they were outdoors. From this point forward, they, took the person over to the hoist. They took the box or the coffin over to the hoist. They attached it by chains. Everything is sealed up. They attached all the tubing and the holes. They lowered the box. They lowered the coffin down. Put it on its rest on this frame. Attached in all the other additional backup safety lines. Attached the wiring for the emergency button. And then the main piping for the main airway of breathing. And then began the process of the first couple scoops of dirt hitting the top of the coffin. And at this point, when only a couple, like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 shovel loads hit, so nothing of any weight, or the point was looking for, is there any tension? Is there any stress going on? Is there any fear starting to manifest? Because it all changes when the moment psychologically comes and we're now experiencing it. When the go was okay, there was no need, everything seemed to be fine, it commenced, and they completely covered it. They piled everything on, and in turn, there is a time amount that it takes to fill in something. It's not just, you're not just chucking dirt in there, for those who don't know. And you're not packing, this isn't like a real burial, so you're not packing it down to add in weight. At least they didn't. And then from that point, they had a clock of how long they were going to leave, this person there, and then bring them back out. Now, 5 minutes to most people doesn't seem like a long time. But at the point that you have to understand that you're talking the prep time to get ready, to go inside, to get, wrapped, to get hooded, to attaching lids, lower, there is a lot of time going by, let alone the time that it takes to be covered up, and then the time to be buried, taken out, or to be dug up. So from there, as that timer allotted, they're looking, because they already figured out also in some of their test runs how long it would take to get somebody out, how fast and stuff they could go down. They had, a backhoe ready, I believe it was. All sorts of safety measures involved. So from there, the timer ran down, brought the person out, no emergency signals, everything seemed to be fine. They'd gone through this big scene, gone through some, breath play while involved. They could hear. There was also a communication thing, a one-way kind of communication put in place. And then from there, she was brought out. Person was brought out. And then at that point, it took, I can't remember exactly how much time, dug out, brought out, chains attached, brought the coffin up, cleared off with a little bit of dirt. They started, brought it up and out, brought it over, took the lid off, took out all the, disconnected everything. Medical people are checking first, okay, heart rate, everything seemed to be fine, no problems, seemed to be completely regulated. From there, removed any other, the bondage or the restriction, the wrap that was completely on to hold this person down. And then the two people connected. And they held each other in an embrace that I think for many of us, as once the scene had kind of culminated, there's cheering and like, oh my God, it's over. This big buildup for all of this had gone on. But you're looking at these two individuals and they're not engaged with anybody else. They're engaged with each other. This connection, this symbolism, this play, this intimate moment that they shared had finally culminated in this big buildup of over time. And they just seemed to hold each other it was a beautiful moment, seemed to hold each other for an eternity. From there, Dominic took the person away, went and cleaned them off, let that person rest, and food and water and everything else that was kind of needed after this process and to start coming down. I think he came out about maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes after. And the rest of us were kind of talking about even the intensity of the scene for everyone else. Because, we may look at things like needle play or doing blood play or knife or edge play and think it's quite intense. Fire play, right? Elemental play is quite intense. That this, in the grand scheme of things, where you're just putting someone in a box, putting them in the ground and covering them with dirt. But there's so much that can go wrong. There's so much that emotionally and mentally that you're feeling that there's a lot, I would argue, is quite invested in this. After a while, the partner emerged and, told everybody they were okay, that they were feeling great. Really were kind of drained from the whole thing and not really wanting to talk at this particular moment, and just kind of needed the rest. So as we were checking on them, like our due diligence over the weekend, medically, they were checked a couple of times, got completely good bills of health. Then psychologically, over the course of about these past couple of weeks and follow-ups. And again, really clear thinking, nothing, no abnormalities developed, nothing that seemed to be emotionally out of the norm. And we sat down and really kind of talked about the feelings and everything involved. And the one thing that I got from the person that was under was, again, an extreme sense of calm. At one kind of with, as they put it, nature. So there was no fear for them. They couldn't hear anything, obviously, but they felt vibrations from the ground. They felt a strange sense of warmth and comfort being inside of this. not moving, just kind of heighten their influence and emotional state of pushing past these limits that they'd long held, and the extreme focus that they had maintained on this connection to their partner. And on the other side was, the extreme sense of concern and worry and love and admiration that they had to go through as far as the dominant towards his property in regards to doing the scene, and how much of a buildup it really and truly was. And it's really an amazing sense of the human condition to go through these extremes. And for some who say, my God, these things, they don't happen, or, these aren't real, but they are real within our community, just the same as when we look at people who put hooks into their skin and suspend themselves from ceilings. These things are actually borrowed from other cultures, or when we talk about people walking across fire as part of a religious practice or ritual, these things do occur, and they're more on the extreme end, or even those who do in certain religious practices who do things with snakes. These extremes do exist, and people find a catharsis. They find a level of personal intimacy and connection with themselves, and they want to engage. So we're a couple of weeks out now past the scene. I really had to convince them to let me actually talk about this today, and I know this is quite long because I wanted to really explain the process that they went through, what they're feeling and where they are at. If you can't quantify love. There's no way for me to measure who loves who more in any given relationship or any familial type thing. I can't say a mother loves whoever, or this relationship, these couples love more than the others, because everybody loves differently. But the profound effect that I've seen, and the other people that was working with on this saw in this, in regards to the level of connection and love that these two individuals have for each other, seems to have grown. This depth and clarity. And this is now not a moment where they're talking about, hey, what can we do next? My God, this was start 2023. Next year, I'm going to set myself on fire. It's not like that. They pushed these limits, and they looked inside of their own relationship and found something that they both could connect to in a way that they couldn't connect to other things before. Even in, pardon me, even in the limits of when we talk about some of their extremes, this would look more tame in comparison to other things that they've done, as far as their sadist and masochistic tendencies seem to go. A lot of us commented, pardon me, that this was actually tame in comparison, but it really wasn't. This was really about the perseverance of the human condition, and how dedicated and emotionally, physically, and mentally strong you have to be to go through it, not just on one side, but on both sides. Because you have to be, you're talking about putting yourself in harm's way, regardless with all the safety checks and retaining walls and medical people there and dig times and all of these things that were taken into account. We still can't predict the unpredictable, and that's where it gets more difficult. Weeks since now that have gone by, and the thank yous have gone out, and the community that experienced this, I think it's really had an impact, as I even have spoken with people who attended. It had a profound impact on them as well. That emotionally, that understanding that this type of connection with somebody else, be greater than ourselves, drawn to wanting to push each other to the limits of our human condition. We see this in extreme sports. People who, for example, free dive, and they'll go down I think I was watching one thing recently about a few hundred meters. I could be wrong. I'm not into that sports. I don't exactly know. But again, pushing ourselves beyond the limits of human understanding to find something that's more, and to listen to this process of what it's like to be there, to be underground, to be completely covered, and to have this sense of calm, not panic, not terror, just calm, and be at one. it was very, for me even, was quite profound to hear all of that. So it was quite interesting. I feel happy to have been a part of this process along the way, and to understand that connection and how these two people have been really brought together through this process has deepened their relationship even further. Do I know if they're going to do something else in the future? Don't know. And that's not for me to decide. That's, whatever they're going to do next. But I think in comparison to their edge play or some of their, more heavy impact scenes, this would probably be the biggest thing that they've ever done together. And its profound impact on their relationship and moving forward. I see a connection now that is so strong and so formulated between the two that it's hard to believe that there's anything else. I don't think this is about topping one scene from another. I don't see a limit that they really want to push to next. I think they've kind of reached, at least in my opinion, reached a pinnacle inside of their relationship that they're really happy about. And that they shared this with our community. They're sharing this now with the bigger community by me taking this story out there and allowing others a little bit inside of their lives without the fear of judgment, because we don't get the right to judge others just because they want to do something, because it's not something we would want to do. And we need to keep that in mind. So, I don't recommend this at all for anybody. The amount of planning that went involved, the money that was spent, the time and the commitments to all of this, it was a lot, and it's a huge process. I'm glad, obviously it went off luckily without a hitch, but I don't, from my standpoint, I don't recommend this for anyone. It's just the same when I don't recommend people doing waterboarding. There's a lot of dangers that are involved. There's a lot of high-end risk that is involved, and if you don't understand these things and you go into them with a very, nearsighted happenstance of, oh yeah, I can do this, you can end up on the wrong side of, our community, where we've moved from enjoyable hurt to painful harm of somebody. That's not where we want to be. So I hope you've kind of enjoyed. I first want to thank these people for letting me get their story out and sharing this with the community. And the comments, I know whether they're going to watch or not. I don't think they're definitely not going to comment on this story or their story. But if you do comment on this on social media, you can maybe talk about, what your thoughts on this might be. Obviously, it's not going to be for everyone, but I don't want to see projection, because I don't want to shame somebody else for doing something just because we wouldn't be involved or we wouldn't partake in something, right? I don't run around, as much as if I enjoyed my last couple of weeks of conversations with people in the rogue community, I don't run around and shame them for doing it. I joke lightly, but at the end, other people's kinks and things they're involved in I'm not privileged, or I don't have the right to say they shouldn't do something. So we should need to keep that in mind. So let me know what your thoughts and comments are. If you are listening to me on Spotify, please like and rate this 5 stars so other people can find this. I do have a book out, Tangled Desires, the intersection of psychology and BDSM. It's wherever you can get ebooks. I'm still working on my edit. Yes, I know I'm really behind. Got a lot of things going on. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay clean.